Imagine a simple man, a shepherd and fig tree cultivator, living in a small, quiet village. He had no titles, was not a scholar of the scriptures, nor was he known among the great men of his time. But suddenly, this ordinary man was called by God for an extraordinary mission, to face kings and religious leaders, denounce injustices, and proclaim a divine message that no one wanted to hear. This is Amos, a prophet who emerged from the obscurity of Tekoa to become one of the most powerful and challenging voices in biblical history. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting biblical stories and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video. A humble beginning in Tekoa. Amos was born in Tekoa, a quiet village in the heart of Judah. The landscape around him was made of vast golden hills under the scorching sun, with fig trees swaying lazily in the wind. It was a land of shepherds, accustomed to the simple rhythm of rural life. In that almost forgotten corner of the world, no one could have imagined that a man from there would rise to become one of the most challenging voices of his time. From an early age, Amos lived a routine that seemed unchanging. He tended his family's sheep, guiding the flocks across the hills, always alert to danger. When he wasn't in the fields, he devoted himself to cultivating fig trees, especially sycamores, which required meticulous care to produce fruit. Young Amos, with calloused hands and sharp eyes, learned to listen to the sounds of nature and understand its signs. To an outsider, he might have seemed like nothing more than an ordinary shepherd, perhaps even a bit reclusive, far from the great cities and their noise. But there was something special about Amos, even if he didn't yet realize it himself. His eyes carried a restlessness, a keen awareness of the injustices that sometimes reached even the remote corners of Tekoa. When he heard the stories that travelers brought from Samaria, tales of wealth, oppression, and the greed of the rich, he felt something stir within him, an indignation that would not let him rest. While the world moved on, a greater voice, silent but unmistakable, began to grow inside him. It was as if the wind blowing over the hills carried a divine whisper, a calling he did not yet fully understand. The moment of calling, then one day, the silence was broken, in a way Amos never could have imagined. That day seemed like any other. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold as Amos led his flock across the hills. The sound of the sheep's bells mixed with the rustling of the leaves and the soft songs of the birds. Everything seemed so calm, so predictable. But something was about to happen, something that would forever change the course of this man's life. While alone, watching his sheep graze, Amos felt the calling. It was not an ordinary voice, not one that could simply be heard and answered with words. It was more like a weight on his heart, a warmth that ran up his spine and seemed to fill his entire being. It was as if the wind itself carried something more than just air, a presence, an urgency. Amos, who had never considered himself special, suddenly realized that God was speaking to him. A mission beyond his strength. God did not call him for a small task. He, a simple man, used to the silence of the fields and working with his hands, was sent to speak in the name of the Creator himself. And it would not be an easy message. Amos was to travel to the kingdom of Israel, in the north, and confront the powerful with harsh words. He was to denounce injustice, greed, and corruption. Imagine the weight of this mission, an unknown shepherd, with no titles or status, sent to confront kings and priests. Amos knew this would be a difficult path. He had no training, no eloquence. I am just a herdsman, he may have thought. But there was no room for refusal. When God calls, even the simplest of men can accomplish great things. The journey to Israel, leaving the fields of Tekoa behind, Amos began his journey northward. The kingdom of Israel awaited him, prosperous on the outside, but rotten on the inside. And Amos carried a message that would be like thunder, shattering the false silence of that place. As he approached, he heard stories about Israel, accounts of luxury, corruption, and empty religion. The cities were filled with palaces, bustling markets, and lavish feasts. But beneath the surface, Amos saw something else: the poor crushed by misery, slaves burdened with labor, and starving children. The wealthy lived as if nothing could touch them, taking advantage of the hard work of the less fortunate. Justice, which should have been the right of all, had become a privilege for a few. Religion had become a spectacle, full of expensive offerings but empty hearts. Amos saw it all and knew his message would not only be difficult to hear, it would be like a blade cutting deep into a society that preferred to keep its eyes shut. Confronting the power of Israel, Amos arrived in Samaria, the capital. It shined with the wealth of the elite, fine fabrics, glittering jewelry, and extravagant banquets. But just beyond the main streets, the reality was different. Amos stood in the city center and raised his voice. The Lord roars from Zion, and from Jerusalem, he makes his voice heard. His words struck like a thunderclap. People stopped out of curiosity, more than reverence. After all, who was this simple man, dressed like a shepherd, daring to speak with such authority? At first, Amos condemned Israel's enemies, and the crowd listened with satisfaction. But then, like a lion suddenly turning on its own pack, Amos turned his judgment toward Israel itself. You who trample the poor and impose heavy taxes of grain, you have built fine houses, but you will not live in them. You have planted beautiful vineyards, but you will not drink their wine. His words cut like a knife, exposing truths that everyone knew but refused to acknowledge. Amos spoke with power, and his voice echoed through the streets of Samaria. He called out the wealthy, the corrupt priests, and the false justice of the land. Some looked at each other, uncomfortable. Others whispered, trying to dismiss him. But Amos remained steadfast. His message was a final warning, a last chance for Israel to change its ways. His voice would echo like thunder in the palaces, a warning to a nation that thought itself untouchable. The legacy of Amos' words were not easily forgotten. He spoke for those who had no voice, the poor and oppressed, exploited by the powerful. He stood against hypocrisy, reminding everyone that true worship is not found in grand ceremonies, but in justice and righteousness. His message did not end in Samaria. It echoed through history, crossing generations, challenging all societies that turn their backs on justice. Amos teaches us that God does not choose the qualified, he qualifies those he chooses. His life is a reminder that true faith is not comfortable, but a call to face the hardest truths, even when it is unpopular. And sir, his story continues today, challenging us to listen, act, and transform the world around us. Are we ready to say yes to the call? If you enjoyed this story of the Prophet Amos and want to hear more stories of faith and resilience, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel.